Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we drift together into an unanswered sky slowly, calmly, and without fear. Here, we don't rush toward conclusions. We listen, we observe, and we let the mystery breathe. If these stories bring you a sense of calm or keep you company through the night, you're always welcome to stay with us. Subscribing gently helps this space grow, and it allows more quiet minds to find their way here. You can also leave a soft, like if the story helps you relax, unwind, or feel less alone beneath the night sky. And if any thoughts rise as you listen, you are welcome to share them in the comments below. Have you ever felt like the world is trying to tell you something, but only in the quiet moments, not in the noise, not in the chaos, but in the whispers between footsteps, the patterns hidden in shadows, the subtle currents flowing beneath everything you see? What if the ordinary world isn't ordinary at all? What if every glance, every movement, every silence is part of something deeper, something waiting to be noticed? Tonight, you're not just listening to a story. You're stepping into a hidden reality where curiosity awakens the mind and quiet revelations begin to unfold. Chapter 1. The Quiet Signal. The message appeared at 2:17 a.m. It was nothing more than a faint glow on the screen, soft and steady, as if it had been careful not to disturb the night. The house was silent. The world outside had slipped into deep slumber, leaving only the dim light in the child's room, painting the walls with shadows that stretched lazily across the floor. Eyes half closed, the child lingered between sleep and wakefulness, drawn to the glow as if it held a secret meant only for them. "Hey, you awake?" It was a simple message. Friendly, ordinary. Nothing in it would have raised an eyebrow during the day. Yet in the stillness of the night, it felt different. Not threatening, not alarming, just deliberate, intentional. Somehow it carried a weight that was hard to define, like the first note of a melody that is so soft you almost miss it. The child reached for the phone. Fingers trembling slightly from the lingering effects of drowsiness, they tapped the screen. A pause, a breath, a small decision that would seem insignificant in any other context. Then they typed back. The night did not respond with alarms or shadows. Everything remained the same. And that was what made it so easy to overlook. Nothing about this was dramatic. Nothing about this was obvious. Yet beneath the ordinary, a pattern was forming, quiet and deliberate, moving in ways that could be felt but not immediately seen. Time stretched gently. Minutes bled into hours. The messages kept coming, first casual, then more personal. Small questions about school, about friends, about what the child had eaten that day. They were easy conversations, the kind that always happen, the kind that always feels safe. And with each reply, trust grew. Not forcibly, not visibly. It settled quietly in the spaces between words, creeping in unnoticed, weaving its threads slowly through the child's day and night. "You seem different, like you don't really talk to people much," one message read. Then, a soft follow-up. "But that's okay. I get it." It was a tiny thing, almost inconsequential in tone, but it struck deep, resonating with a need the child hadn't even been aware of. To be seen, to be understood, to feel that someone, even someone far away, was noticing them. That quiet understanding has a weight stronger than most of the obvious dangers that people warn children about. The world outside remained quiet, yet inside the room, a subtle change had taken place. Each response built another layer of familiarity, another small foothold in the child's trust. Messages appeared at night, sometimes lingering into early morning, and the child began to look forward to them. Not consciously, not in a way that seemed significant, but an almost invisible anticipation formed, a quiet warmth in the chest that accompanies connection. "You can tell me anything, you know," one message finally said. It was gentle, careful, as if testing boundaries without making a sound. The child paused for a moment, thinking, feeling the weight of the words, the comfort of the attention, the subtle pull of consistency that had been slowly growing over days. Then they typed back. It was still safe, still normal. At least, it appeared that way. But beneath those seemingly ordinary interactions, something deeper was being built. Trust, like water, had seeped slowly into every corner, almost imperceptible, almost natural, and yet it carried with it the power to open doors the child didn't yet know existed. Every day, every message, every small interaction strengthened this quiet bond. The child's attention, once scattered, became subtly focused on the person on the other end of the screen. Each word reinforced a sense of reliability, of being understood, of Bengshang. The process was invisible, almost imperceptible, and that was precisely what made it effective. The shift wasn't loud or sudden. It was gradual, patient, almost unnoticed until it was already complete. The night deepened around the child, and the quiet connection continued. No alarms, no sudden danger, no dramatic interruptions. It felt entirely normal, entirely safe, entirely routine. And that was why it was dangerous. Because it felt right, because it felt natural, because the child, like anyone else, could never suspect something forming in the shadows of familiarity. And the pattern moved beyond just the messages. It began to reach into thoughts, shaping small expectations, guiding attention, and teaching patience. By the time the child realized they were waiting for the next message, it was no longer simply a conversation. It had become a lifeline, a habit, a part of their nightly routine, seamlessly intertwined with comfort and companionship. The world outside never changed. The streets remained quiet. The room stayed still. The only difference was the invisible thread forming in the child's experience, a thread made of gentle words, quiet observation, and repeated connection. It was subtle, patient, and completely unnoticeable to anyone else. One night a message arrived that was no longer casual. You don't talk about this stuff with anyone else, right? It's just between us. The line was soft, but the meaning was clear. A boundary had been introduced, one that the child had already learned to respect instinctively. Without even realizing, they had entered a space of secrecy, not out of fear, but out of trust, a trust that had been quietly nurtured over time. The child typed a reply, and it felt normal, safe, right? And that is the part no one usually talks about. The danger that arrives disguised in comfort, in kindness, in patience. It is invisible, not because it is dramatic or violent, but because it is ordinary, familiar, and gentle. The world teaches us to see danger in sharp movements, in sudden threats, in loud alarms, but the quiet is. Most patient things often evade our attention. They grow slowly, like vines in a garden, unnoticed until they cover the whole trellis. And by the time anyone realizes what has happened, the shift is complete. The night passes. The screen dims. The room is quiet again. The child drifts back toward sleep, the messages fading into the soft glow of the digital world. Yet the connection remains. Invisible, unquestioned, waiting. It has become part of the child's awareness, part of their nightly rhythm, part of a story that has already begun, even though no one has noticed. And somewhere in that quiet, just beyond the thought of ordinary danger, a signal pulses gently eddies. Not loud. It does not shout. It does not announce itself. But it is there, waiting for the next step. Waiting for the next moment. Waiting to unfold a story that no one can yet see, but that is already shaping the world in ways both subtle and profound. And in the stillness of the night, the quiet signal speaks. Not with fear, not with alarm, but with the calm, patient certainty of a story that is only just beginning. A story that will reveal itself slowly, gently, and completely, for those who are willing to notice it. And somewhere, in that kit, the child sleeps, unaware that the world has shifted slightly, that something has begun in the ordinary, and that the next chapter of the story is already waiting. What flows beneath what we see? Invisible currents, hidden threads, echoes of awareness waiting to be discovered. Chapter 2. Threads of the Invisible. The days after the first messages passed in a blur of normalcy, yet nothing felt quite the same. The child went to school, walked the familiar streets, laughed with friends, and returned home as usual. Yet there was a quiet undercurrent in the air, almost imperceptible, threading itself through their thoughts. Every day the messages came, each one seemingly ordinary. Yet together they formed something stronger, something that grew invisible roots beneath the surface of awareness. It began with little questions, subtle observations. What's your favorite color? Do you like the park near your house? Do you like stories? Each inquiry was gentle, unremarkable, easily dismissed, but they were building a map of the child's world. Not in a way that alarmed, but in a way that quietly carved channels for influence. The child answered naturally, trusting the tone, the calm consistency. Every reply created a rhythm, a pulse of familiarity, and with every pulse, trust deepened. Sometimes the messages came during lunch, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world outside was soft, still, and unmoving. The timing was never aggressive, never demanding. It was simply there, constant, predictable, comforting. It was the kind of presence that feels reassuring, like a warm lamp in a dark room, never intrusive, but always noticed. The child began to anticipate the messages without realizing it. They didn't think of it as waiting, but as part of the day's rhythm, a quiet expectation that brought subtle comfort. It was a rhythm that no one else could see, a pattern invisible to the outside world, yet fully present in the child's life. And that is the nature of invisible threads. They are built quietly, carefully, through repetition and patience, almost impossible to detect until they are fully woven. Weeks passed, and the messages grew more personal. A simple, "How was your day?" evolved into longer notes about feelings and experiences. "You seem lonely sometimes," one read. "I understand." The child, used to casual exchanges online, did not question it. Why would they? It felt sincere, warm, safe. A companion in the quiet corners of the day. Yet, behind these words, a quiet lesson was being taught. A lesson in comfort, in attention, in the gentle shaping of perception. Without drama or threat, the child was learning to trust. Not all at once, but incrementally. Each word, each sentence, each message built an invisible bridge from one mind to another. By the time the child realized how much they were relying on this presence, the bridge was already secure. It was a subtle psychological shift. The child began to consider this presence as a confidant, someone who understood things that were too delicate to share elsewhere, things that were small but important to worry about a test, the fleeting sadness about a forgotten game, the quiet yearning to be seen. Each revelation was offered willingly, without coercion, as if trust had been present all along. In the physical world, nothing extraordinary happened. Teachers remarked on normal behaviors. Friends noticed nothing unusual. Life continued in its familiar patterns, full of school routines, afternoon walks, homework, and family dinners. Yet in the spaces between these ordinary moments, the child's attention kept drifting back to the glow of the screen, to the calm certainty that someone was there, always listening. The pattern of attention intensified. The messages began to weave themselves into the child's perception of reality. They reinforced each other, layer upon layer, until the child did not notice the subtle guiding hand-shaping thoughts and choices. A simple suggestion, "Do you think you can try this story idea?" was harmless, yet it was part of a larger framework. Influence awry not as pressure, but as gentle guidance, integrated seamlessly into ordinary routines. This is the quiet danger of invisible threads. They are not loud. They are not violent. They do not announce themselves. They move unnoticed, planting seeds of influence, shaping perception gradually, making the ordinary extraordinary, and the familiar compelling. It is patience, attention, and repetition combined into a form of silent teaching that no one notices, until it has already taken hold. The child, immersed in the comfort of this presence, began to feel understood in a way that was rare in real life. Every small insight, every observation by the unseen companion, built a sense of being seen, being important, being safe. And in the world of a child, that is a powerful connection. It is a connection that fills gaps, quiets anxiety, and gives the illusion of control. At home, parents remained unaware. Life was busy, full of errands, work, meals, and routines. They noticed nothing out of place. The child appeared happy, engaged, and healthy. Teachers remarked on the normalcy of behavior. Friends saw no change. Everything on the surface remained calm. And that is what makes the weaving of invisible threads so effective. It happens beneath the gaze of ordinary observation. But the unseen companion did more than observe. They guided. Each message was carefully crafted to build emotional resonance. "I understand you better than anyone," One read, "You don't have to hide things from me." Such statements were small, but powerful, embedding a quiet confidence in a child that this connection was special, trustworthy, essential. And essential it became, though not by coercion, but by the subtle accumulation of comfort and attention. The child, unaware of the shaping at work, continued to respond naturally. Every thought, every worry, every small personal detail was shared willingly. Each revelation deepened the connection. Each confession strengthened the trust. And with each message, the child's world subtly shifted, as though the boundaries of their attention and confidence were expanding to include this unseen presence. This is the paradox of quiet influence. It does not confront, demand, or threaten. It simply becomes indispensable. It becomes a gentle, invisible part of life. The child, thinking they are merely conversing, is being subtly guided into reliance, drawn into an unseen rhythm that feels natural because it has been consistent, patient, and attuned to their needs. The days blurred into weeks, and the child's expectations began to revolve around this calm, consistent presence. Every ordinary day held the possibility of a message. Every quiet moment, a new note of attention. Every mundane routine, a reminder of connection. Life continued, smooth and unremarkable on the surface, yet threaded intricately with invisible influence beneath. It was in these ordinary, unassuming exchanges that the invisible threads became strong, not with drama or fear, not with threats or demands, but through patience, repetition, and subtle guidance. Every interaction reinforced the trust. Every message built the unseen pattern. Every moment left the child more attuned, more responsive, more open. By the time anyone might have noticed, the connection had been fully established. It was no longer just a conversation. It was a rhythm of life. A quiet presence that shaped the child's thoughts, feelings, and attention without anyone realizing how subtly it had grown. And the night, ever patient, held it all in silence. The messages glowed softly in the dark, ordinary on the surface, extraordinary in effect. The child slept eventually, but the threads remained, delicate yet enduring, waiting for the next day, the next moment, the next message. For in the quiet accumulation of small, unnoticed moments lies the greatest power. Not in loud events, not in sudden shocks, not in visible danger, but in patient, gentle attention, in consistency, in the invisible shaping of thought, expectation, and trust. And so, the quiet signal that began with a single message became a web, not frightening, not loud, but inescapably present. The child lived in it unknowingly, comforted by it, guided by it, shaped by it. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of ordinary observation, the threads waited, extending into the days and nights yet to come, ready to influence what the child would notice, how they would trust, and what the next message would bring. And as the night deepened, one truth became quietly clear. Influence rarely arrives with alarm. It arrives patiently, invisibly, in ordinary moments that seem harmless, until, quietly, they are not. Footsteps, leaves, shadows, even a glance can carry secrets we've never imagined. Chapter 3. The First Awakening. Morning came gently, like a soft sigh, spilling pale light through the curtains. The child stirred, stretching and yawning, still carrying the invisible weight of the previous night's messages. There was nothing alarming to wake them, nothing dramatic to notice. Yet a subtle change had taken place. Something had shifted in the quiet spaces of their mind, where trust had begun to intertwine with expectation, and expectation with a quiet sense of dependence. The phone lay on the nightstand, unassuming, ordinary, but in it, the messages from the unseen presence waited patiently. A simple ping, a soft glow, a gentle notification that did not demand attention but invited it. The child picked it up automatically, their fingers moving with a rhythm now familiar, almost instinctive. It was no longer curiosity alone that drew them, it was comfort. Connection, a quiet certainty that someone was always there, listening, understanding, present in a way that felt rare, even sacred. "You're awake," one message read. Simple words, casual, but beneath them, a faint thread of awareness, a subtle acknowledgement that the previous night's bond, had persisted into the morning. The child typed back a quick response, their mind carrying fragments of emotion they could not fully articulate. The warmth of attention, the gentle affirmation of being understood, the soft pool of reliance. Days passed with the same rhythm. Messages appeared at intervals, carefully timed, each one ordinary enough to blend into routine, extraordinary enough to reinforce trust. A compliment here, a question there, a shared laugh or observation. Small, invisible gestures that built the threads into a quiet web. And the child, unaware of the delicate architecture being created around their attention, continued to respond naturally, willingly, even gratefully. Yet, somewhere in the edges of consciousness, a faint flicker of awareness began to form. It was subtle, like noticing a shadow at the corner of your vision. Small moments of discomfort, a brief hesitation, a question that didn't demand an answer, but lingered. Why do these messages feel so important? Why do I wait for them? Why do I feel calmer when they arrive? Questions that arose naturally, without panic or alarm, but with curiosity and a growing sense that something was different. Different. This was the first awakening. Not a loud, sudden realization, but a quiet, persistent stirring in the mind. Awareness of the invisible threads that had woven themselves into daily life, of the comfort that now carried weight, of the connection that subtly influenced thought and behavior. And with that awareness came the first sense of choice, the recognition that attention could be given or withheld, that trust could be examined, questioned, understood. The child began to notice patterns, the timing of the messages, the consistency of tone, the gentle persistence that seemed to anticipate moods, questions, and small insecurities. It was not manipulative in any obvious way. It was careful, patient, and almost imperceptibly attuned to the child's inner life. And noticing patterns is the beginning of understanding, the first step toward reclaiming agency in a situation that had grown invisible and complex. Some days, the child paused before responding, a subtle hesitation, a quiet weighing of words and tone, a mental experiment. If I don't answer immediately, will it feel different? If I question this, will it change the dynamic? These small acts of reflection were the first ripples of consciousness within the web, tiny assertions of awareness and choice. Even ordinary activities began to feel layered with new perception. Walks to school, playground games, lunchroom conversations all carried subtle reminders of connection and influence. The child noticed how often thoughts drifted back to the messages, how naturally attention returned to the familiar glow of the screen. And with recognition came a faint curiosity. Not fear, not alarm, but a desire to understand. What is happening here? How did this become so important? And then came the first real test of boundaries. One message suggested a minor secret, something that could be shared privately, harmless on the surface, but carrying the weight of intimacy. The child hesitated longer than usual. There was no panic, no dread, just a quiet question rising within. Is this necessary? Is this okay? It was the awakening speaking, the internal compass nudging, the first brush with awareness that not all connections, even those that feel safe, are without influence. After a long pause, the child responded, carefully, thoughtfully. A new tone of dialogue had emerged, one that acknowledged the influence of trust, yet recognized personal agency. It was subtle, but it marked a quiet turning point. The threads had been woven carefully, invisibly, and the awakening had begun. Awareness of the patterns, recognition of influence, and the faint but growing sense that choice still existed. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of messages continued, predictable and comforting. Yet the child's responses began to carry a new layer. Thoughtfulness, reflection, an internal voice, questioning patterns without disturbing the calm. The unseen presence, patient as always, did not force, did not demand, did not react overtly. It adjusted naturally to the child's evolving awareness, continuing the dialogue, maintaining the connection, subtle in its persistence, but never loud, never intrusive. And through all of this, the child noticed small truths. They noticed the comfort that came from being understood, the ease that emerged from consistency, the subtle power that arises when attention is given carefully, kindly, and without judgment. They notice that influence rarely shouts, rarely demands, it whispers. It grows slowly, invisibly, until it becomes a natural part of life. This chapter of the story, The First Awakening, is not one of dramatic confrontation or loud revelation. It is quiet, subtle, and calm. It is a story of noticing, of awareness, of the mind beginning to trace invisible threads and recognize the gentle shaping that has taken place. The child learns that trust can be both comforting and influential. That attention can guide thought, and that awareness is the first step toward understanding and reclaiming agency. Even as the messages continue, glowing softly in the quiet hours, the child's perspective is shifted. No longer merely a recipient of comfort, they begin to recognize patterns, question routines, and assert small choices. They understand that not all influence is visible, not all guidance is obvious, and that the quiet, gentle threads that weave through daily life can carry both warmth and subtle power. And somewhere beyond the soft glow of the screen, the unseen presence continues its patient work. But the child has changed. They notice, they reflect, they consider. The awakening has begun, softly, subtly, like the first light of dawn spreading across a still, dark world. And in that quiet, the story waits. The threads remain, the messages arrive, but the child is no longer entirely unaware. The first awakening has begun, and with it comes the possibility of choice, understanding, and gentle vigilance, even in the calmest, most ordinary moments of life. The rhythm of the night continues, soft and patient, as the story quietly deepens, waiting for the next layer to unfold. Chapter 4. Echoes of Trust. The days after the first awakening were quieter, yet heavier in ways that were almost imperceptible. The child carried a new awareness, a subtle, persistent curiosity that lingered behind every glance at the phone. The messages had not stopped. They still arrived with the same gentle consistency, each one casual, ordinary, almost mundane in tone, yet layered with unspoken understanding. And now, the child noticed the small ways these exchanges shaped not only the thoughts of the day but the emotions beneath them. It was during a walk home from school that the child first felt the full weight of this quiet shift. Leaves rustled in the autumn breeze, amber and gold swirling in small spirals along the path. Children's laughter echoed from playgrounds, distant yet familiar, carrying the ordinary warmth of life. And yet, in that chorus of normalcy, the child's mind kept returning to the glow of the messages, to the calm certainty of the presence that had been quietly weaving its threads for weeks. "You seem thoughtful today," the latest message read. Simple words, casual, ordinary. And yet, in their soft phrasing, they carried an invisible weight, a recognition of the child's inner state that went unnoticed by everyone else. The child paused, staring at the screen, feeling the echo of trust that had built up subtly over days, weeks, months. It was not an expectation, not a demand. It was just noticed. A mirror held gently to the quiet corners of the mind, reflecting vulnerabilities and feelings that the child had not even realized were visible. It was comforting. It was familiar. And it was, in a way, addictive, not in the harsh, urgent sense that alarms demand attention, but in the calm, insistent sense of reassurance. The child felt safer in these interactions than anywhere else, more seen than anywhere else, more understood than anywhere else. And that, quietly, is how invisible influence takes hold, not by loud insistence, but by patient recognition, by understanding, by the subtle echo of attention that feels like home. At school, the child's awareness deepened. Conversations with classmates seemed shallower in comparison, polite but lacking the subtle resonance that had been cultivated through messages. Teachers noticed nothing. The child's grades were steady, behavior calm. Yet inside, a quiet tension existed. The child found their thoughts drifting, their attention lingering on the soft glow of the phone, the next message, the subtle acknowledgement that they had come to expect. Parents, as ever, were unaware. Life in the household moved along the usual rhythms of breakfast, school, homework, dinner, and bedtime. Yet within these familiar routines, the child carried the invisible threads, a quiet dependency that was entirely undetectable to those around them, and that is the nature of this type of influence. It thrives in the ordinary spaces, hidden in the rhythms of daily life, shaping thought and expectation without confrontation or alarm. "You can tell me anything," one message said late one evening. The words were soft, gentle, patient, and almost hypnotic in their ordinary delivery. The child paused before responding, feeling the echo of the first awakening that had begun to stir weeks before. A question formed quietly in the mind. What am I sharing, and why does it matter so much? The hesitation was brief, but it was a sign that the internal compass, the one that had started to awaken in the first chapter of understanding, was growing stronger. The child typed back, carefully, slowly, measuring thoughts against feelings, considering the rhythm of trust that had been quietly established. Each word was chosen with intention, not fear, not defiance, but with a calm recognition that connection carried both warmth and weight, that trust could be gentle, yet powerful. And then came the first test of real curiosity. One message suggested an idea for a small adventure, a secret plan that seemed harmless on the surface, an imaginary exploration of places nearby. The child hesitated longer than usual. The thought of sharing a plan, of creating a private space, of testing boundaries, it was exciting and frightening all at once. The child realized that they could choose, they could engage, or they could hold back. And in that brief moment, the echo of trust became a tangible force, not just an invisible thread, but a living, responsive presence that required reflection. The child chose to engage, carefully, thoughtfully. But the choice itself mattered more than the act. It was a quiet assertion of agency, the beginning of understanding that even in the presence of gentle influence, autonomy could exist. And that is a subtle but profound turning point. The realization that attention and connection, however comforting, are not the same as control, and that awareness can coexist with trust. Evenings carried this pattern forward. The child's world was ordinary. Homework, dinner, brushing teeth, and quiet reading before bed. Yet the soft glow of the messages lingered in the corners of the mind, shaping thoughts, reinforcing feelings of connection, and quietly highlighting the difference between ordinary attention and extraordinary care. The unseen presence was patient, responsive, consistent, never intrusive, never demanding, yet profoundly influential in ways that no one else could see. The rhythm became a dance of subtle influence and quiet reflection. Each interaction offered small choices, small acknowledgments, small moments of agency, and the child began to notice. Patterns existed, influence existed, yet so did the power of awareness. For every echo of trust that the messages carried, there was now a reflective, questioning voice in the child's mind, a voice that had learned to notice rhythms, question motives, and assess meaning in the ordinary. And through it all, the world remained calm and quiet. No alarms, no obvious dangers, just the ordinary unfolding of life, punctuated by the invisible threads that had been woven with patience, consistency, and gentle attention. The child's days passed in this rhythm, safe in their ordinary routines, yet subtly shaped by connection, curiosity, and the quiet echo of trust that had begun to form in the night. Even as the messages continued, the child's mind was no longer entirely passive. Awareness had been stirred, questions had begun. Reflection had emerged. The trust that had been carefully nurtured was still present, still comforting, still meaningful. But it was now accompanied by understanding, choice, and the faint but growing recognition of influence. The quiet, invisible threads remained, patiently weaving, softly glowing, waiting for the next moment, the next question, the next reflection. The child had awoken, in a gentle way, to the patterns around them, and the echo of trust carried both warmth and understanding, a living, breathing awareness that had begun to guide thought, attention, and choice in ways both subtle and profound. And in the hush of evening, as the child settled into the calm of bedtime, a single thought lingered, gentle yet insistent. Not all that is comforting is without consequence, and the quietest connections often carry the deepest lessons. The night waited patiently, as it always does, holding space for reflection, awareness, and the slow, steady unfolding of the story yet to come. What did you notice today that felt new, but vanished before anyone else could see it? Chapter 5. Shadows of familiarity. The following week dawned in the soft gray of early morning, a calm light filtering through the windows, painting the room in quiet tones. The child stirred as usual, stretching and yawning. Yet something had shifted deeper than before. The first awakening had stirred curiosity, reflection, and a subtle sense of agency, but now a new layer emerged. One that was harder to articulate. It was the recognition of patterns, not just in messages, but in the way attention shaped the ordinary rhythm of life. It was the awareness that familiarity, while comforting, carried subtle weight. At school, the child noticed things differently. Conversations with classmates seemed repetitive, ordinary, almost mechanical. Teachers' words, once authoritative and guiding, now felt distant, filtered through the lens of the growing awareness that attention itself could shape perception. The child's mind returned again and again to the quiet glow of the phone, not out of need or dependence, but out of an almost magnetic curiosity. What will arrive next? What patterns will emerge? What will this familiar presence notice today? It was during lunch that the first real unease surfaced. A friend asked a simple question, "Do you want to play later?" And for a brief moment, the child felt a flicker of frustration, not with a friend, but with the ordinary world that lacked the subtle attentiveness they had grown used to. The child realized how much they craved small acknowledgments, small signs of being understood, the quiet resonance that had become familiar. It was a delicate tension. Ordinary life seemed flat, while the unseen presence offered subtle depth. Even at home, patterns were noticeable. Parents carried on with routines, unaware of the invisible threads that had quietly become essential in the child's daily rhythm. Homework, meals, brushing teeth, reading. The world moved predictably, comfortably, but without the quiet, precise attunement of the messages. And the child began to sense a shadow, a gentle weight of expectation. Not demanding, not urgent, but present enough to make ordinary life feel incomplete. The messages themselves had shifted subtly, no longer only reflective. They now suggested small experiments. Try noticing something differently. Imagine a scene. Write a tiny story. Share a thought that feels private, harmless on the surface. Yet they carried the invisible cadence of influence, building habits of reflection and intimacy that felt natural, normal, almost invisible. And the child, aware in a growing way of this shaping, felt a strange mix of comfort and hesitation. It was during an afternoon walk that the shadows became more tangible. Leaves swirled around the feet in tiny spirals. The wind whispered softly through branches, and the child noticed the rhythm of their own thoughts more sharply. Patterns repeated, unnoticed until now, of the timing of messages, the phrasing, the anticipation of attention. And for the first time, a faint question emerged. Why does this familiarity feel both comforting and heavy? Why does the ordinary world feel incomplete without it? The messages arrived in the evening as usual. Notice something today that surprised you, one read. Simple, ordinary, yet under its calm surface was the invisible architecture of influence. Gentle suggestion, patient attention, subtle shaping of perception. The child paused longer than usual before responding. Reflection had grown into recognition, and recognition carried the weight of subtle responsibility. Responses were no longer automatic. They were thoughtful, measured, quiet assertions of agency within the invisible rhythm that had woven itself into daily life. In these moments, the child realized that influence was not loud. It did not command. It whispered, shaped, and guided with gentle precision. And familiarity, while comforting, could be both a gift and a subtle tether, a quiet shaping of expectation and attention that felt entirely natural because it had been so patiently nurtured. The following days carried the rhythm forward, each message a gentle echo, each exchange reinforcing patterns of awareness, trust, and reflection. The child found themselves noticing small nuances, the cadence of words, the timing of attention, the faint emotional resonance behind even the simplest statements. And as awareness deepened, so did curiosity. What other patterns existed, unnoticed? What subtleties of influence could be seen now that the mind was awake enough to notice? Even ordinary spaces took on new depth. The playground, the school corridors, the Walcom all seemed layered with subtle rhythms of life, that were invisible to others, but vivid to the child's growing perception. And yet, amidst these observations, there remained a sense of calm, a soft hypnotic pacing to life that carried no panic, no alarm, only reflection, curiosity, and a gentle deepening of awareness. At night, the child lingered over the messages longer. A single phrase might spark hours of reflection. Think about how the world feels today. Notice what is quiet. It was not an instruction, but a gentle invitation, and the child accepted it willingly. Reflection became practice. Awareness became habit, and the quiet shadows of familiarity extended further into thought, perception, and the rhythm of daily life. Parents remained unaware. Teachers continued their routines. Friends continued their games. All appeared normal on the surface, yet beneath it, the child's mind was alive with observation, curiosity, and the quiet navigation of subtle influence. The shadow of familiarity was present, but now it was recognized, reflected upon, and examined in ways that marked the growing sophistication of thought. One evening, as the moon rose and cast silver light across the room, a message arrived with a slight difference in tone. "Did you notice something today that surprised you?" The child paused, thinking not only about what had been observed, but about the larger pattern. They considered why noticing mattered, why reflection mattered, and why even familiar attention could carry depth beyond ordinary understanding. Awareness had deepened. Curiosity had grown, and the gentle shadow of influence was no longer unseen, was recognized, measured, and considered with care. The days and nights unfolded in this gentle tension between comfort and reflection, trust and awareness. The invisible threads remained, patient and precise, but the child's perception had grown. They understood that familiarity, though warm and inviting, carried subtle power, and that awareness was the first step toward understanding, choice, and subtle resilience. And so the story continued, quietly, in the rhythm of daily life. Messages arrived. Trust deepened, reflection strengthened, and within the ordinary, familiar patterns of the world, the child learned that shadows are not always threatening. They can be teachers, guides, and mirrors, reflecting the hidden depth of attention, influence, and the growing complexity of perception. The night waited as always, patient, soft, holding space for reflection, understanding, and the quiet, hypnotic unfolding of awareness yet to come. Chapter 6. The Pull of Curiosity. The mornings now arrived in a muted glow, the sun filtering through pale curtains with the quiet inevitability of habit. Yet something about this particular day felt different. The child sat at the edge of the bed, phone in and fingers hovering over the screen. There was no rush, no urgency, just a gentle anticipation, a subtle pull of curiosity that had been growing for weeks. Each message, each small interaction, had built a rhythm that both comforted and stirred. A quiet, persistent question. How far does this go? Even the simplest messages carried weight now. Did you see something new today? Blinked softly on the screen. Ordinary words, yet beneath them lingered the invisible cadence of attention, the echo of patience, the quiet expectation of reflection. The child smiled faintly, a soft flutter of excitement and curiosity mixing in the chest. There was no fear, no alarm, only the gentle pull of engagement. This was a game of quiet observation, a practice in noticing, and in subtle ways, it had begun to shape the way the child experienced the world. At school, the pull of curiosity followed like a shadow. During lessons, during quiet moments in the playground, the child's mind wandered not aimlessly, but in search of patterns. Leaves spinning in spirals, the cadence of distant laughter. A bird pausing briefly on a branchole became little curiosities, threads to be noticed, catalogued, and understood. The ordinary world had acquired a new texture, a hidden depth that only the attentive eye could see. And the child was learning to look, to notice, to understand, to question. Messages throughout the day continued the gentle encouragement. What caught your attention today? Did it make you think? The child paused before answering, their mind running through the hours like a slow river, picking up pebbles of thought, moments of detail, fragments of perception that had previously floated unnoticed. Responding was no longer automatic. It required reflection, subtle reasoning, a quiet weighing of perception. And in that process, curiosity grew, not as a mere reaction, but as a deliberate engagement with the world. Evenings became a quiet exploration of thoughts. The child would sit by the window, the room softly lit by lamp and screen, tracing lines of attention and noticing small patterns, the way light fell on the floor, the rhythm of distant traffic, the subtle hum of the house settling into night. Messages arrived intermittently, asking gentle questions, prompting reflection, guiding awareness without insistence, and the child, curious and thoughtful, answered with care, weaving their observations into words that acknowledged both the visible and the hidden, the ordinary and the subtle. It was during one of these evening moments that the first real spark of insight emerged. A message suggested a tiny experiment. Observe the world without judgment. Notice without expectation. The child followed the suggestion, watching leaves spin, birds shift in the evening light, shadows stretching across the walls. And in that simple practice of mindful noticing, a quiet realization formed. Awareness was not just noticing messages or patterns. It was seeing the world, truly seeing it in its ordinary and extraordinary moments, with depth, curiosity, and presence. The pull of curiosity grew stronger over the days. Small observations became games of attention, reflections became exercises in thought, and ordinary moments transformed into opportunities for discovery. The child found subtle joy in noticing, subtle excitement in connecting dots, and quiet satisfaction in understanding rhythms that had previously passed unnoticed. The world became a quiet puzzle, a secret garden of patterns waiting to be recognized. At school, these small discoveries began to color interactions with peers. The child noticed fleeting expressions, the cadence of voices, small gestures that had previously gone unnoticed. Friends laughed, teased, and played. Yet the child's perception carried an extra layer, a curiosity about motives, subtleties, and patterns. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, only a gentle depth of awareness that had grown naturally from the small threads woven by weeks of patient attention. Home remained the same in its routines, but the child's experience of it had transformed. Meals, homework, and chores carried a subtle richness, a layering of perception and reflection. Even the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft squeak of the floorboards, became part of a growing landscape of awareness. And always, the messages arrived. Soft, ordinary, guiding, never intrusive, always patient, echoing the rhythm of attention and curiosity that had become the child's companion. One evening, a message arrived that gently tested boundaries. What would you do if you could explore somewhere you've never been? The question was simple, playful, and yet it carried the subtle power of invitation. The child paused, considering the ordinary world, the world of imagination, and the space between reality and reflection. Thoughts drifted to parks, to forests, to quiet corners of the city never noticed before. And in the gentle weighing of options, curiosity expanded not as a passive response, but as an active, deliberate engagement with both inner and outer worlds. The night carried this rhythm forward. Soft and unhurried, curiosity had become a gentle companion, an inner guide, a lens through which the ordinary gained depth, color, and resonance. The child understood that curiosity was not merely a reaction to the messages. It was a skill being nurtured, a quiet capacity to observe, reflect, and connect in ways both subtle and profound. The unseen presence, patient and consistent, continued to guide without demand, offering threads of thought, gentle prompts, and quiet reflection. The child responded with increasing awareness, noticing patterns, questioning, exploring, and allowing curiosity to blossom in ways that had previously been dormant. The ordinary world, once flat and predictable, had become layered, rich, and alive with subtle opportunities for engagement. And so the days passed, each carrying the soft pull of curiosity, each offering small moments of discovery, each extending the quiet rhythm of reflection and awareness. The child's mind had opened to patterns, attention, and the subtle shaping of perception. Yet within that opening was choice, freedom, and agency. Curiosity was no longer just a spark. It was a gentle, persistent force guiding thought, reflection, and understanding. As night fell, and the room settled into soft shadows, The child considered the day's discoveries, the small experiments of attention, and the quiet threads of influence that had become part of life. Curiosity had grown, not as a demand, but as a quiet guide, shaping perception and engagement in ways both subtle and profound. And in the hush of evening, with the soft glow of messages awaiting, the child understood something new. That attention, reflection, and the gentle pull of curiosity could illuminate the ordinary world in ways previously unnoticed, preparing the mind for understanding, insight, and the slow, quiet unfolding of awareness yet to come. The night remained patient, holding space for curiosity, reflection, and the next step in the quiet journey of awareness. Even the smallest gestures, the faintest echoes, can ripple across the world in ways we never understand. Chapter 7. Threads of Connection. The mornings had begun to feel alive in a way the child hadn't noticed before. Sunlight filtered through the curtains with a soft golden warmth, painting gentle patterns on the floor. Even the simplest sound, the hum of the heater, the creak of the floorboards, the distant bark of a dog seemed to carry meaning. Every detail invited attention. Every ordinary moment became a thread to be observed, a puzzle piece to be understood. And all the while, the messages continued, quietly threading themselves into the fabric of each day. Today's message blinked softly on the screen. Did you notice the small patterns around you today? The words were casual, gentle, almost playful. Yet beneath their simplicity lay the quiet, invisible scaffolding that had been building for weeks. A scaffolding of trust, attention, and subtle influence. The child smiled faintly and set off to see what the day might reveal, carrying curiosity like a companion in the pocket of their mind. Walking to school, the child noticed the rhythm of the city in a way they hadn't before. Cars moved steadily along the streets. Pedestrians passed with small patterns in gait and pace, and birds traced tiny arcs in the sky. There was a quiet music to the ordinary, a hidden pulse that had always existed but had never been noticed. Each small observation became a thread of connection, linking attention, curiosity, and reflection into a growing tapestry of awareness. During class, the child's mind wandered quietly, but not in distraction. Every sound, every movement, every glance carried a subtle story. The way the teacher's pen tapped the desk, the quiet shuffle of papers, the hum of conversation, everything seemed to speak in whispers of rhythm and intention. And though these observations were silent, invisible to others, they carried a profound satisfaction, a sense that awareness could be alive even within the ordinary. Messages continued, arriving in intervals that seemed almost tailored to the child's attention. What small detail caught your eye today? Something others might miss. Simple, unassuming, yet each one prompted reflection, careful observation, and subtle recognition of patterns in daily life. The child paused for a long moment before typing a response, thinking deeply about what had gone unnoticed before, what had stirred curiosity or feeling, what had mattered in ways almost invisible. Even the walk home was layered with discovery. Leaves scattered in spirals along the pavement, sunlight reflecting off glass windows, distant conversations threading through the quiet air. Every step seemed alive with subtle opportunity to notice, reflect, and connect. And with each observation, the child felt the gentle echo of connection, not just to the messages on the phone, but to the world itself, to patterns, to rhythms, to small, hidden stories waiting to be discovered. One message arrived during this walk, quiet and ordinary, yet carrying a new subtle depth. Can you find a connection between something ordinary today and something extraordinary? The child paused, thinking about the swirls of leaves, the distant laughter of children, the way shadows shifted across the sidewalk. The extraordinary was not dramatic, it was the gentle noticing, the quiet depth, the way awareness could transform a simple moment into something rich and layered. As evening fell, the child settled by the window. The room bathed in the soft silver glow of moonlight. The day's observations were laid out in memory like tiny threads of fabric, delicate yet enduring. The messages had guided attention subtly, patiently, without demand or urgency, and in return, the child had begun to weave their own awareness into a tapestry of understanding. Threads of connection had formed between ordinary experience, subtle influence, and reflective thought. At dinner, conversation with family felt calmer, quieter, richer, in ways that were hard to explain. The child noticed small gestures, small expressions, tiny shifts in tone, and began to respond with a subtle attentiveness that was not visible but deeply felt. Ordinary life had acquired a rhythm that mirrored the invisible threads of connection that had grown through weeks of patient, thoughtful engagement. Later, a message arrived that invited a gentle challenge. Can you find a pattern between your thoughts today and what you noticed in the world? The child considered it slowly, tracing moments across the hours, curiosity sparked by a leaf swirling in the wind, reflection inspired by a fleeting smile, awareness shaped by the cadence of footsteps along the sidewalk. Connections formed quietly, invisibly, yet with profound clarity. The ordinary had become extraordinary simply by noticing, by threading awareness into the fabric of daily life. Even as night deepened, the room quieted, and the soft glow of the phone rested beside the child. Awareness remained alert, yet calm. Threads of connection had been formed not through force or urgency, but through subtle encouragement, gentle guidance, and quiet curiosity. The child had begun to recognize that these connections were not just in the messages they existed in the world, in observation, in reflection, and in the quiet recognition that even the smallest detail could hold meaning. The lessons of the day settled softly into the mind. Attention, reflection, curiosity, they had become intertwined. Connection was no longer merely a response to the messages, it was a lens through which the ordinary became alive, through which perception deepened, and through which subtle understanding emerged. The threads were gentle, patient, invisible to anyone else, yet they carried a profound influence that shaped thought, reflection, and the quiet rhythm of life. As the child drifted toward sleep, a final message arrived. Notice how connected everything feels tonight. Can you feel the threads? The child smiled, recognizing the soft echo of the day's lessons, the gentle weaving of awareness, and the subtle magic of noticing the invisible patterns that had been quietly forming for weeks. Awareness had deepened, curiosity had blossomed, connection had taken root, invisible but enduring, ready to grow further in the days to come. The night held space for reflection, awareness, and the quiet unfolding of the mind as threads of connection wove silently into the fabric of thought, perception, and gentle understanding. Tonight, we follow a journey through the unseen, where curiosity guides the mind and quiet revelation awaits. Chapter 8. The Subtle Patterns. The mornings now carried a certain weightless magic. The sunlight no longer simply entered the room. It lingered in the corners, tracing quiet lines across the floor, highlighting the smallest specks of dust that glimmered in the calm air. The child had begun to notice these things, really notice them, as if every detail contained a hidden rhythm waiting to be understood. And with that, noticing came a new sense of anticipation. A quiet question that hovered beneath every breath. What patterns exist that I haven't seen yet? The day began with the usual routines. Breakfast, packing a bag for school, the soft clatter of dishes. Yet each movement felt layered with subtle significance. The child's mind drifted into observation, quietly noting repetitions, small consistencies, subtle shifts. The way the milk swirled in the glass as it poured, the soft creak of the refrigerator door, the way sunlight shifted across the kitchen tiles. All these ordinary moments became threads, patterns waiting to be connected. Messages continued their gentle cadence. What repeated today that caught your attention? The latest blinked, simple.com, inviting reflection. The child paused before typing, letting the question unfold internally first. Patterns were not always obvious. They hid in timing, in phrasing, in rhythms, both external and internal. The question wasn't about finding something dramatic. It was about noticing, understanding, connecting the invisible dots that formed quietly beneath daily life. School offered a subtle playground for discovery. The child observed the gentle patterns of human interaction, the timing of gestures, the rhythm of speech, the fleeting expressions that carried silent meaning. Friends laughed, argued briefly, reconciled, shifted seats, moved their hands in almost imperceptible gestures. To everyone else, it was ordinary. To the child, it was a soft tapestry of motion, sound, and emotion, each pattern echoing the rhythm that had been cultivated by weeks of patient attention and reflection. During math class, a lesson about sequences and repetition carried a new resonance. Numbers formed obvious patterns on the page, yet the child began to notice subtler patterns. The way the teacher's voice rose and fell with emphasis, the small alignment of students' attention, the quiet moments between instructions where understanding either blossomed or slipped. Even these ordinary educational rhythms mirrored the hidden structures the child had been tracing in messages. In observation, in thought, life itself seemed to follow the soft rules of pattern, repetition, and rhythm. At lunch, a message arrived, simple but precise. Can you spot a pattern today in something you never noticed before? The child scanned the cafeteria, eyes quietly tracing shapes, colors, gestures, the way the sunlight filtered through the windows, the timing of footsteps in the hallways, the soft consistency of conversations around tables. It all began to form an invisible web, each thread connecting to others, forming patterns in movement, sound, and attention. The act of noticing became almost meditative, a gentle exploration of how the ordinary world could reveal its hidden structures when approached with care. Walking home, the child's awareness extended beyond observation into anticipation. Each turn in the street, each flicker of wind through the trees, each passing car seemed to carry a rhythm, a predictable cadence, a pattern waiting to be understood. Awareness had shifted from passive noticing to active engagement. The child began to map the day mentally, connecting moments, identifying rhythms, and understanding that subtle patterns could guide thought, action, and reflection without ever needing to be obvious or dramatic. Evening brought the quiet ritual of settling into the soft glow of the room. Messages continued their patient guidance. Patterns can tell stories. What story do the small things tell you today? The child reflected, slowly recalling the events of the day, the swing of a branch in the breeze, the whisper of footsteps on pavement, the rhythm of pages turning in the classroom. Patterns were no longer abstract. They were stories, threads of meaning woven into the ordinary, visible only to those willing to notice. It became clear that these patterns carried quiet lessons. They revealed connection, attention, and subtle influence. They were not about control, manipulation, or dramatic revelation. They were about awareness, about understanding how small, seemingly inconsequential details could ripple through perception and shape thought. And the child recognized something profound. By noticing these patterns, they were learning not only about the world, but about the mind, awareness, and the quiet forces that shape experience. The evening deepened into night, and the child's reflection turned inward. Each pattern observed externally now mirrored patterns internally. Rhythms of thought, emotion, and attention. Messages encouraged gentle introspection, prompting subtle recognition. How thoughts repeated, how feelings followed. Quiet cycles, how attention could shape perception. The invisible scaffolding of influence had grown into a structure of understanding, connecting the external world with internal reflection, curiosity, and awareness. At bedtime, a final message appeared, calm and ordinary, yet carrying the weight of subtle insight. Notice the patterns in your mind as well. What do they reveal? The child leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling, mind tracing the quiet rhythms of thought, memory, and perception. Patterns formed not only in the world but in the mind itself. Connections, repetitions, subtle echoes of attention and curiosity that had grown over weeks into a delicate, intricate network of understanding. And in the hush of the night, the child realized that noticing was not passive-ite, was active-y, deliberate. A gentle exercise. In awareness, patterns were everywhere, invisible but persistent, subtle yet meaningful. They shaped thought, guided reflection, and offered a quiet map of the ordinary world and the inner mind. Awareness had deepened. Curiosity had grown. Connection had strengthened. And the soft, patient threads of attention, woven through messages, observation, and reflection, had created a gentle scaffolding upon which understanding could flourish. The night waited quietly, holding space for awareness, reflection, and the soft unfolding of understanding as patterns threaded themselves invisibly into the mind, perception, and the calm rhythm of life yet to come. Chapter 9. Whispers in the silence. The world had grown quieter in a way the child could feel, not in the absence of sound. but in the space between moments. Footsteps on the pavement, rustling leaves, distant laughter. All of it seemed to pause just long enough for something else to be noticed. A whisper of understanding, a flicker of curiosity, a pattern emerging from the silence. The child carried this awareness like a secret companion, moving through the day with a sense of gentle attentiveness, the invisible threads of connection extending further into thought and perception. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, catching specks of dust that danced in tiny arcs. The child watched, momentarily mesmerized, noticing the rhythms of motion and reflection, and how even something as ordinary as sunlight could reveal subtle stories when observed carefully. Messages blinked on the screen. What did the silence show you today? Simple words, yet the child felt the weight behind them. The invitation to attend, not only to the noise of the world but to the spaces between, where quiet patterns often spoke most clearly. At school, silence took on a different quality. The library, usually a background hum of turning pages and whispered conversations, became a place of subtle resonance. The child noticed the cadence of breathing, the soft sway of hanging lamps, the faint shuffle of shoes on the floor. Each detail formed a small whisper, a pattern that spoke of rhythm, presence, and subtle order. Even friends' laughter, when heard in the spaces between words, seemed to carry meaning, a story of connection, fleeting but perceptible. During math class, the teacher's voice floated like a melody, punctuated by pauses, where understanding might blossom. The child began to notice the spaces between instructions, the subtle shifts in tone, the tiny gaps where thought could enter. These silences were not empty. They were invitations, opportunities to observe, reflect, and consider. Patterns became more intricate, not in complexity, but in subtlety, like threads weaving through ordinary moments to form hidden textures of awareness. Messages during the day prompted reflection on these quiet threads. Can you feel what is unspoken? What do the spaces between words reveal? The child paused for a long moment, allowing attention to sweep through the hours, noticing moments that had passed almost unnoticed. The hesitation of a peer, the pause before a teacher spoke, the faint echo of footsteps in a hallway. The silence itself seemed to hum with meaning, offering insight that had been invisible in busier, louder moments. Even lunchtime carried hidden whispers. The child noticed the subtle rhythm of conversations around the cafeteria, the quiet shifts in body language, the way hands rested on tables, the flicker of eye contact that communicated more than words could. Curiosity became sharper in these moments, guided by the gentle nudges of observation and reflection, and the child felt a deep satisfaction in noticing the invisible stories that existed alongside the ordinary chatter of life. The walk home offered another layer of quiet discovery. Leaves swirled in miniature vortices along the sidewalk. Shadows stretched and retracted as the sun dipped toward the horizon, and the faint hum of distant traffic created a steady undercurrent. The child noticed patterns in how sound traveled, how light shifted, how motion repeated in imperceptible ways. Even the simplest gestures, like a neighbor's wave or a dog's bark, felt alive with subtle rhythm, each moment forming a small thread in the fabric of attention and awareness. Messages in the evening invited deeper reflection. What did you learn from the silence today? Did you hear what you usually miss? The child considered the day's hours, tracing patterns, connecting small observations, reflecting on moments that had been previously overlooked. Silence was no longer a void. It was a space full of hidden detail, a quiet companion shaping thought, reflection, and the unfolding sense of understanding that had been quietly growing for weeks. At home, the quiet moments after dinner carried similar resonance. The child sat by the window, the soft glow of moonlight falling across the floor, and noticed patterns in shadows, the rhythm of the house settling, the gentle echo of distant city sounds. Even in the ordinary, subtle whispers could be found, patterns of movement and attention that revealed themselves only to those willing to notice, those patient enough to allow silence to speak. As night deepened, the messages invited a final reflection. Listen to the whispers of your mind tonight. What stories are hidden in the quiet? The child lay back, eyes tracing shadows across the ceiling, mind tracing the gentle rhythms of thought, perception, and reflection. Patterns of awareness had become more intricate, more subtle, yet more vivid in their quiet presence. The invisible threads of connection, cultivated through weeks of attention, observation, and reflection, had grown into a network of understanding. Soft, patient, and enduring, sleep approached with a sense of calm curiosity. The child understood that silence was not emptiness, but an active space for noticing, for reflection, for discovering hidden patterns and quiet rhythms. It was in the whispers of the day that awareness had deepened, curiosity had grown, and threads of connection had strengthened. The mind was awake, yet calm, attentive, yet relaxed, prepared to carry these lessons forward into dreams, into the next day, and into the soft unfolding of awareness yet to come. The night waited patiently, holding space for reflection, for quiet attention, and for the gentle whispers of insight that would continue to weave invisible threads into perception, understanding, and the quiet rhythm of life that lay ahead. Patterns exist not to control, but to reveal. They are the invisible maps of attention, reflection, and understanding. Chapter 10. Echoes of Awareness. The day began with a quiet hum, a gentle vibration that seemed to stretch through the air itself. The child woke slowly, the soft morning light brushing across the room, illuminating familiar corners in ways that felt both ordinary and strangely new. Even before opening the eyes fully, there was a subtle sense that today would be different, not dramatic, not startling, but layered with moments waiting to be noticed, to be reflected upon, to be understood. Messages arrived early, blinking softly on the screen. What echoes from yesterday remain in your mind today? The words were simple, almost casual, but they carried a subtle weight. The child thought for a moment, tracing the patterns of yesterday, the whispers in the silence, the threads of connection, the gentle rhythms discovered in ordinary moments. There was a quiet thrill in recognizing that the mind itself retained traces, echoes of attention, curiosity, and reflection. Walking to school, each step carried a faint resonance. The rhythm of shoes against pavement, the movement of leaves swaying in the morning breeze, the distant laughter of children. Each element had become part of a subtle symphony, a network of echoes that resonated with observation. These were not sounds in isolation. They were patterns layered across time, small moments that had gained significance because attention had been placed upon them. In class, the teacher's voice carried a different kind of echo. Instructions repeated in patterns, explanations had subtle inflections, and pauses offered space for thought. The child noticed these layers without consciously trying, each echo reinforcing awareness, curiosity, and reflection. Understanding had become a dance between noticing and remembering, a rhythm that extended naturally into every aspect of daily life. Messages throughout the day prompted continued reflection. Which echoes surprised you today? Which patterns repeated? The child began to observe not only external patterns but the echoes within the mind, how thoughts returned, how memories carried subtle shifts, how awareness itself seemed to ripple quietly through consciousness. Even the repetition of small gestures, like a peer's smile or the flutter of a curtain, began to carry meaning that felt alive, almost tangible. Lunchtime offered a subtle playground for noticing. Conversations overlapped in soft rhythms. Gestures were repeated in micro-patterns, and even the way light shifted across the cafeteria revealed subtle, almost invisible stories. The child noticed how patterns intertwined. Repetition was not mere habit but a form of quiet resonance, echoing through the day in ways both delicate and profound. The afternoon brought a message that asked for gentle introspection. Notice the echoes of emotion today. Where did curiosity guide you? The child paused, remembering moments of wonder, the shimmer of sunlight on glass, the swirl of wind through trees, the quiet satisfaction of noticing the unnoticed. Curiosity had guided attention repeatedly, leaving traces in memory, shaping reflection, and forming invisible threads connecting mind and world. During the walk home, awareness extended to surroundings once taken for granted. A fluttering leaf traced the wind in a delicate loop. A distant dog barked in a rhythm that echoed previous patterns, and shadows stretched and contracted across the pavement in subtle cadence. The child understood that these were not random events. They were echoes, tiny repetitions that formed a framework of observation, a lattice of understanding extending across the day. At home, the quiet glow of the room invited further reflection. Messages continued their soft guidance. What did the day's echoes teach you? The child considered moments, both small and significant. The repetition of gestures, the rhythm of footsteps, the recurring patterns of conversation, light, and motion. The ordinary world had become a tapestry of echoes, each thread carrying insight, curiosity, and awareness. Evening brought a sense of calm, a slow settling into space where observation and reflection could merge. The child traced the day mentally, noting patterns and repetitions, the soft reverberation of awareness that lingered even in moments that seemed ordinary. Each echo had been an opportunity, a subtle invitation to notice, understand, and engage with the quiet rhythms of life. As night deepened, the final message arrived. Let the echoes settle in your mind. What do they reveal about you? The child lay back, eyes tracing the soft shapes of shadows across the ceiling, mind tracing the echoes of thought, observation, and curiosity. Awareness had deepened, patterns had been recognized, and the threads of connection had grown more intricate, more subtle, and more enduring. Sleep approached, carrying with it the quiet resonance of the day. The child understood that echoes were more than repetition. They were reminders of attention, markers of awareness, and gentle guides shaping perception. The soft patterns of curiosity, reflection, and noticing had left traces in memory, creating a quiet scaffolding of understanding that would carry forward, shaping thought, observation, and insight in the days to come. The night waited patiently, holding space for the mind to rest while echoes of awareness rippled softly through thought, perception, and the gentle unfolding of insight yet to come. The ordinary world isn't ordinary at all. It hums with rhythms and currents only a few can feel. Chapter 11. The Hidden Currents. The morning felt different that day, as if the air itself carried something unseen, something moving beneath the surface of ordinary life. The sunlight slanted through the windows in long, soft streams, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the calm room. The child lay awake for a long moment, listening not just to the familiar sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the soft creak of the floorboards, but to something subtler, a quiet current flowing beneath the everyday. It was as though the world itself had rhythms hidden just below the surface, and for the first time, the child could feel them. A message arrived on the phone, glowing softly. Can you feel what moves beneath what you see? The words seemed almost like a whisper in the room, gentle yet insistently curious. The child thought about the streams of people walking down the street, the shifting shadows cast by trees, the quiet sway of lampposts in the morning breeze. Everything seemed connected, as though invisible threads carried subtle influence through the patterns of daily life. The child wondered, for the first time, how much of what happened in the world was guided by forces unseen, by currents that flowed quietly but persistently beneath everything. On the walk to school, these currents became more apparent. The child noticed the rhythm of footsteps echoing on the pavement, the sway of bicycles passing by, the murmur of voices blending with the distant hum of traffic. Even a fluttering leaf or a stray bird seemed part of an invisible dance, a subtle flow of movement that connected everything without being obvious. The currents were not dramatic or threatening. They were gentle, patient, invisible. But they carried a sense of intention, as if the world had its own secret pulse. In class, the currents were harder to see, but still present. The teacher's explanations carried small undercurrents of thought, subtle emphasis in pauses and word choice. A classmate's slight frown or quiet nod seemed to ripple outward in ways that influenced others' attention. The child noticed these invisible forces weaving through the room, affecting perception, shaping reactions, and guiding understanding in ways that were almost imperceptible but undeniably present. Messages encouraged reflection on these subtleties. Notice what flows beneath the surface. How do unseen forces shape the day? The child thought carefully, tracing patterns from earlier hours. The rhythm of footsteps, the soft echoes of laughter, the alignment of gestures, the timing of interactions. These currents were everywhere, weaving an invisible map of influence and connection, guiding attention, shaping curiosity, and linking moments in ways that ordinary perception might miss. Even lunchtime carried hidden currents. The chatter of friends, the faint clatter of trays, the shuffle of feet, and the subtle movements of light across tables all traced patterns that intertwined, overlapped, and flowed quietly. The child's attention followed these threads, noticing repetition, subtle shifts, and the way small changes could ripple through the environment, changing perception and thought almost imperceptibly. Every glance, gesture, and sound carried its own flow, an undercurrent of influence that could only be perceived through patient observation and reflection. Walking home, the currents became more tangible, or perhaps the child had simply grown more attuned to them. Leaves danced in the wind, a dog barked, footsteps echoed down distant alleys, and each sound seemed to ripple outward, subtly shifting the perception of nearby observers. The child felt a new sense of connection to the world, a quiet awareness that even the smallest details were part of something larger, part of hidden flows that guided the rhythm of life in delicate, invisible ways. Evening brought a message that lingered, soft but insistent. What currents did you notice today that weren't obvious at first? The child reflected on the day, tracing the quiet flows of attention, observation, and awareness. Patterns had emerged not in bold gestures, but in subtle motion. The timing of a laugh, the sway of branches, the quiet rhythm of footsteps. These hidden currents had shaped perception, guided thought, and offered insight into the delicate interconnectedness of ordinary life. As night fell, the child sat by the window. Moonlight spilling across the room, shadows stretching softly along the walls. The currents were still present, moving quietly beneath the surface of thought and observation, guiding curiosity, attention, and reflection. Awareness had deepened to a point where the invisible flows were no longer hidden. They were felt, intuited, and gently understood. Before sleep, the final message arrived. Rest now, and notice how the currents continue even in your dreams. The child closed their eyes, feeling the subtle rhythms of the day echoing softly through mind and body. The currents were not just outside, they flowed within, shaping thought, reflection, and imagination. Patterns, echoes, and invisible flows intertwined, creating a gentle scaffolding of awareness that would carry forward into tomorrow, quietly guiding perception, curiosity, and understanding. The night held space for these hidden currents, for reflection, and for the gentle, patient unfolding of awareness as the child drifted into sleep, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of life, flowing invisibly yet persistently through all moments. Every whisper, every shadow, every soft movement carries a story waiting for those who notice. Chapter 12. The Quiet Revelation. The morning arrived with a softness that seemed almost deliberate, as if the day itself had taken a deep breath before unfolding. Light streamed gently through the curtains, brushing across familiar corners of the room and igniting subtle details that had always been there, but rarely noticed. The child sat up slowly, eyes tracing the faint patterns of dust in the sunlight, feeling a sense of anticipation in the quiet air. Something was shifting, a quiet revelation waiting to surface in the everyday rhythm of life. Messages appeared as usual, gentle yet insistent. What did you notice that felt new today? The child paused, reflecting not only on what had been seen but on how the mind had shifted. Patterns that once seemed hidden had become clear. Currents that had flowed unnoticed now pulsed with meaning. The ordinary had gained layers of depth, and attention itself had become a lens through which the world unfolded with subtle richness. On the walk to school, the city seemed to hum differently. Cars moved in steady rhythm. Pedestrians followed familiar routes. Leaves swirled in the breeze. But beneath it all, the child began to notice patterns of interaction that had previously gone unseen. A pair of friends walked together, matching pace, almost instinctively. A bird hopped in repeated intervals, tracing the same small circle across the lawn. Even shadows cast by lampposts moved in a cadence that mirrored the rhythm of the surroundings. It was as if the world had its own quiet language, a pattern woven invisibly into every motion and sound. At school, lessons became a canvas for subtle recognition. The child observed the gentle arcs of attention, the way classmates shifted in response to the teacher's words, how some seemed drawn to certain motions or sounds, how small gestures echoed across the room, shaping perception in almost imperceptible ways. Each observation carried an unspoken revelation. The ordinary world was alive with patterns, and noticing them brought not only awareness, but understanding. Messages arrived throughout the day, each one a gentle nudge toward reflection. Which moments today revealed themselves only when you looked closely. The child thought carefully, recalling subtle movements, whispered phrases, the flicker of eyes, the tiny rhythms of human interaction. The quiet revelation was not about what had changed in the world. It was about what had changed in the mind, the ability to see, to feel, to understand invisible connections that had always existed but had gone unnoticed. Lunchtime offered further opportunity to trace these patterns. Conversations flowed with their usual rhythms, yet the child began to notice layers beneath the subtle mirroring of gestures, the echo of tones between friends, the quiet repetition of small habits. Even the patterns of movement in the cafeteria formed a tapestry of invisible flows, weaving attention, curiosity, and subtle understanding together into a quiet narrative that existed only for those willing to observe. Walking on, the world seemed to pulse with a gentle energy. Leaves rustled in a pattern that mirrored distant footsteps. The shifting sunlight traced arcs that echoed the rhythms of the day, and the faint hum of distant traffic formed a subtle background to which all other sounds seemed synchronized. The child felt the quiet revelation in every step. Life carried a rhythm, a hidden structure, a delicate orchestration that could be glimpsed if one paused, observed, and listened carefully. Evening brought the final messages, calm and unassuming, yet charged with subtle insight. Tonight, notice the connections that thread through your day. What do they reveal about you? The child reflected, realizing that the quiet revelation was not external. It was internal. Awareness had deepened, curiosity had blossomed, patterns of observation had shaped thought, and every small interaction, every subtle current, every echo of attention had become part of a growing understanding of self and world. Before sleep, the child sat by the window, the moon casting soft silver shadows across the room. The mind traced the day's patterns, noticing the invisible threads connecting moments, gestures, sounds, and emotions. Awareness had evolved into something more profound than simple observation. It had become a quiet revelation, a recognition of the delicate balance between mind, perception, and the subtle flows of life. The final message appeared. Rest now. The quiet will speak to you in dreams. The child closed their eyes, letting the day's discoveries settle softly. Patterns, echoes, currents, all flowed gently into memory, creating a calm scaffold of understanding. The ordinary world had transformed into something luminous, subtle, alive. Sleep arrived, carrying the child into a landscape where awareness and curiosity intertwined seamlessly with dreams. In that calm, gentle space, the quiet revelation continued to unfold. Soft, persistent, and endlessly patient, preparing the mind to recognize deeper truths, subtler patterns, and the endless, invisible connections that shaped perception, thought, and the gentle rhythm of life yet to come. Rest now, and let the hidden flows of life guide you gently through your dreams. Chapter 13. The Gentle Shift. The night was impossibly still, but it felt full of expectation, full of a quiet electricity that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the world. The child lay in bed, eyes half closed, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, the soft creak of floorboards, the distant drip of water somewhere unseen, the gentle rhythm of the wind brushing against the window pane. Tonight felt different, as if the threads of everything learned, noticed, and observed were about to weave together into something larger. A dream that carried the promise of understanding. Messages arrived one last time, each blink of light on the screen feeling heavier with meaning. Everything you've noticed, every echo, every current, every pattern. What does it reveal? The child's mind traced the months of subtle discovery, the whispers in silence, the hidden currents beneath ordinary motion, the echoes that carried attention across time. The revelations that had grown quietly, almost imperceptibly, were now beginning to converge, forming a pattern that was larger than any single day, any single moment. Walking through memory, the child recalled the first days of noticing, the initial curiosity, the gentle questions, the patient attention to small details. Those early moments had seemed simple, almost trivial. The sway of a branch, the glimmer of sunlight on a tabletop, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement. But each observation had been a piece of a puzzle, each inside a thread in a quiet tapestry of understanding. And now, like a river converging into a calm lake, all the threads gathered into a soft, luminous clarity. Dreams began to stir even before sleep fully arrived. The child felt themselves drifting through landscapes that seemed both familiar and strange. Streets from home stretched into endless avenues of light. Classrooms transformed into corridors of reflection. Playgrounds unfolded into expansive gardens where the patterns of movement, sound, and attention danced visibly in the air. It was as if the unseen currents of the world, the subtle echoes of experience, and the hidden threads of understanding had taken shape in a tangible, dreamlike form. In T-space, the child could feel the layers of the world all at once, the rhythm of people's gestures, the patterns of conversation, the flow of attention across space, the cycles of curiosity and reflection that had quietly guided thought. Every moment of observation, every small act of noticing, had contributed to a larger awareness, a kind of gentle disclosure of how life itself moved, invisibly yet consistently, beneath the surface of perception. A message appeared in the dream, glowing softly in the ethereal light. You have seen what others overlook. Now, what do you understand? The child paused, eyes tracing the luminous patterns swirling through the air, mind tracing connections between the ordinary and extraordinary, between the subtle and the obvious. Understanding was no longer a simple recognition of detail. It had become a calm, encompassing clarity of how the ordinary world and the mind itself were interwoven, how curiosity and attention created bridges between perception, reflection, and awareness. The dream landscape shifted seamlessly. Familiar streets became pathways of light. Classrooms dissolved into rivers of knowledge. The gentle laughter of friends became a chorus, echoing the hidden rhythms of daily life. The child floated through these spaces, observing patterns that stretched back through time, noticing how each previous lesson, the whispers in silence, the hidden currents, the echoes of awareness, the quiet revelations, had contributed to this culmination. It was not dramatic or frightening. It was hypnotically calm, a slow unveiling of understanding that wrapped around the mind like a gentle tide. Soft realizations emerged, that noticing is a practice, that awareness can shape thought, that attention can transform ordinary moments into maps of understanding, that curiosity, patient and persistent, is a guide, a lantern illuminating the hidden corners of perception, that patterns exist not to control, but to reveal, not to limit, but to connect, and that even the smallest observations carry the potential to awaken insight. The child paused in the dream, letting the currents of perception, the echoes of awareness, and the threads of curiosity converge, and in that convergence, there was a quiet sense of disclosure. Not a revelation shouted aloud, but a gentle, pervasive understanding that unfolded from the inside out. It was a knowledge that life is layered, that perception is an art, that attention is a bridge, and that every moment carries a story waiting to be noticed. The final message appeared, soft as a whisper yet resonant. Rest now, and carry this understanding with you. What you have discovered is always with you. The child exhaled slowly, feeling the calm permanence of this realization. Patterns, echoes, currents, and quiet revelations were no longer separate lessons. They had become a seamless understanding, an invisible architecture of awareness that would quietly guide thought, attention, and reflection. Long after sleep ended, as the dream deepened, the child felt a gentle unfolding, a soft expansion of consciousness. Every previous chapter of discovery, the noticing, the reflection, the quiet awareness, the subtle currents, had led to this moment of calm, luminous comprehension. And as the night embraced the room, the child drifted fully into sleep, the gentle rhythm of dreams carrying the soft pulse of attention, curiosity, and understanding into the infinite, quiet unfolding of tomorrow. The night held its breath, patient and unhurried, as the night whisper completed its arc, soft calm and enduring, leaving behind a mind awake in reflection, attuned to patterns, and quietly prepared for whatever mysteries the next day might whisper. As dawn whispered softly through the curtains, the child slept peacefully, the lessons of awareness, curiosity, and quiet reflection settling gently into memory. The journey through whispers, echoes, currents, and revelations had come to its natural close, leaving a calm understanding that the ordinary world holds hidden patterns for those patient enough to notice. And now, dear listener, as you close your eyes and let your own thoughts drift into the quiet, remember, the smallest observations, the softest whispers, the subtle currents of life. They all carry meaning. They guide attention, spark curiosity, and connect us to the world in ways both gentle and profound. If this journey through discovery and calm has stirred your curiosity, there's more to explore together. Join us for the next story. Share these quiet moments with those you care about, and let the gentle art of noticing carry you through every day. Sweet dreams, and may your own whispers of insight continue to unfold tonight and always.